Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm starting a new series I've wanted to do for a few months, but moving got in the way. You can see I'll be working on a Monster High doll today, and I'll explain why in a minute. I receive a lot of questions about materials, and after talking to a few friends about it, I decided it might be helpful to take time to review a whole bunch of different brands of art supplies, and show exactly what they do, some pros and cons, and what you can expect from them. Interestingly, right after I decided to do this series, Arteza contacted me and asked if I wanted to try any of their art supplies. They were already on the list of brands I wanted to cover, so I said yes, and today I'll be giving their watercolor pencils a trial run. Arteza's set is 72 pencils in a variety of colors. Each pencil is stamped with a color name, color number, and a light fastness rating, which is represented by these little plus marks. Light fastness doesn't really matter for dolls because most people don't expose their dolls to excessive light, but it is important for other art applications, and if you're like me, you want your supplies to pull double duty. The pencils come sharpened, but not super pointy. But right away, I discovered one of the best features of these pencils is that the leads are super straight and also firmer and smoother than a lot of watercolor pencils I've used, meaning it's easier to get a super sharp point. This is vitally important for doll face-ups, so I'm excited to see how this works. I'm showing the ultramarine pencil here because ultramarine is an extremely difficult pigment, and the pencils are usually really gritty and brittle, which makes them hard to sharpen. At time of filming, this set is on sale for about $30 USD, which makes them one of the least expensive brands I think I'll be reviewing. As with all watercolor pencils, these can be used wet or dry, but we'll be using them dry for most doll applications. Aside from making a swatch sheet, I haven't used these pencils at all before starting this video, so I'm kind of going in blind. Watercolor pencils are super popular for doll repaints and BJD face-ups, but as you might know if you've seen my other videos, I don't have that great of luck with watercolor pencils. I've sealed this doll with Mr. Super Clear and grab a brown pencil to start my sketch. I'm not going to deviate too much from the sculpted eye shape with what I have in mind for this doll, but we'll see how it turns out. So as I'm sketching here, you might see that the colors are pretty pale at first. It's going to take me a minute to figure out how the colors will look on the colored vinyl, because Clio is a pretty warm brown. Watercolor pencils always require a lot of layers to build up color, because you can only lay down so much on a doll at one time. Through the course of this video, I work up 4 layers, which for a vinyl doll is not that many. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm working with a Monster High doll, which I don't really focus on too much. But as I experiment with each material, I felt it was important to break them down into different hobby applications. Materials that are safe for vinyl may not be safe for resin, and vice versa. And the surface is not exactly the same texture either, so different materials may give different results on those two types of doll. There are a lot of vinyl dolls on the market now, so making sure I test materials for safety on vinyl in addition to resin is important. I'm starting with vinyl for these pencils, because I don't have any resin dolls that need to be repainted right now. I do have a doll family practice head coming that I'll be using for most of the resin experiments, but it's not here yet. One thing I immediately liked about these pencils was that the colors are very similar in consistency. In other, more expensive brands of watercolor pencil I've used, there are always a handful of pencils that are more gritty or chalky, and some that are a lot more brittle. The pigments that are consistently worst for me are ultramarine, black, and any shade of ochre. So when I got to these colors in my Arteza set, I was really surprised to find that the consistency of the colors was not any different from the others. All these pencils pretty much feel the same, and have the same texture. They lay down a consistent amount of pigment and sharpen very easily. In fact, these pencils sharpen better than any other watercolor pencil I've used this far, which left me really impressed. And I'm not using a fancy sharpener either. As I said earlier, the ability to retain a sharp point is vital for watercolor pencils and doll applications, and these pencils knock that out of the park. I also feel like the color laydown is very smooth. I don't end up with any surprise chunks of pigment scraping through the sealant, which has been a problem for me in the past with much more expensive pencils. And I also don't have any problem getting the color to layer on. It goes on pretty bold and builds up really easily and smoothly. I won't lie, I didn't expect these pencils to be any good based on the price point. I expected something chalky or gritty, low in pigment load, and they don't seem to be any of that. I'm immediately a fan of the white pencil in particular, since white is one color I consistently have trouble getting to work for me in dull applications. I've bought a lot of different white watercolor pencils, and none of the others have laid down color quite as well as this one. So that's another point in Arteza's favor. There are a few things I don't like though. Two of them are probably extremely personal, petty quibbles, but I'll share them anyway. The first is, while some of the pencils have pigment names on them, most do not. So if I'm trying to find a comparable pigment to a different brand of pencils, I'm better off referring to my swatch sheet to try to find something in a similar color. Burnt ochre is labeled, but then they skipped other earth tone pigment names in favor of coffee and food themes. So that can make it tough to find what I'm looking for without my swatch sheet right there. Second, the numbering on the pencils seems to be completely arbitrary. I think they're numbered based on series or collection, but the watercolor pencils aren't sold in smaller sets. So while most colored pencils I've used are numbered based on where they are in a color chart, if these were arranged by number, the colors would be all over the place. Each tray is sorted more or less into a rainbow, and I swatched them in the way they're laid out in the tray as they arrive. But I'll want to rearrange them at some point to make more sense color palette-wise, and that's going to take a lot of weird eyeballing because none of the color numbers or names are consistent with what I'm used to. So those are my two nitpicky, whiny complaints, and I acknowledge those are probably just personal preference and have no actual bearing on the usefulness of the pencils. The third issue is the only one I foresee being a problem, and I already touched on it a second ago. These pencils are not sold in any smaller sets, and they're also not available individually as open stock. There are some colors I rely on way more than others, so my black and brown pencils will be worn to nubs before some of these even get touched. And unfortunately, there's no way to replace those without buying another huge watercolor pencil set, and then having double the colors I never really use. It's my hope that as the company expands, Arteza will introduce a solution for this, even if it's just introducing smaller sets that contain only those colors that tend to get used up first. But those are really my only complaints. I've ended up doing this a little out of order from what I had originally planned, but that's not entirely my fault. My PC decided to start dying last week, and I'm in the middle of moving everything to my writing laptop to get me by until I can afford to build a new PC, which will probably be next year. And in the process of moving things, I misplaced some of the video files I intended to use. So sometime next week, I'll show you the box opening, the rest of what Arteza sent me to test for this series, and I'll show you some more about the packaging and product presentation, so that you'll know what to expect. As far as this project goes, one really pleasant surprise was how easily I was able to use the pencils for a more subtle gradient while doing the gray eyeshadow. The pencils retained a point amazingly, and I only had to pause to resharpen the black pencil a little bit one time, which made the really tiny lines and lashes super easy to manage. I didn't expect a lot out of these because of the price, and they ended up really impressing me. So while I finished this doll off with a bit of chalk pastel and a bit of pearl pigment, I want to give a big thank you to Arteza for letting me try these out. For work on vinyl dolls, they deliver good results, feel less delicate and more beginner friendly than other watercolor pencils I've tried, And the low price of the big set means you can get every color you could possibly need for repaints or face-ups in one purchase. So I give these a thumbs up and would definitely recommend them for vinyl dolls, especially if you're on a budget. I'll be trying these pencils on resin as soon as my practice head comes in, hopefully sometime next week. And if I can, I'll try to squeeze in some extra info between weekend updates, because I have 1,000,001 things going on right now and I'm really excited to share some of them. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.